Thank you, Annie. Okay, so hi. I actually put this slide thinking that I might bring a hype, hoping because there were no, this type of people in the audience. So I also wanted to ask if any one of y'all thought that I was, which nationality I was coming from, which country I was coming from, but Shani killed it. But no, no. So no. So I'll put it this way. Um, when you saw me first, and if you didn't know me, did you ever know which country I was from, or did you just categorize me to be Indian? Indian? Okay, so that's okay, right? That's normal. So how that works is, so let's clarify. I am coming from Sri Lanka. Yes, we fall into, so India is like a big brother. Nobody cares about us. We're down there. And so, but we have everything in that little tiny dot, lot going on. So, but the good news is that we are an independent country, plus we have our own identity. So in case the ones who didn't know where we were, so just down is Sri Lanka. And yes, like those pretty Indian ladies, would you now tell me, will you be able to track or identify the Sinhala script? Yeah, a few here and there. Okay, well done. Okay, so, but if you look at it, there is definitely a significant similarity among it. So like the skin color and so on. So, but who we are is also very specifically, is very significant for, or the significance comes in with our identity, I would say. So our script also has its own history. Like I know a lot of y'all have been overwhelmed with a lot of script and images. So I hope those faces helped y'all. But coming back into this whole script, so we also have script everywhere. We have its own, we have our own evolution. And so, of course, when it comes to all different surfaces, we have Ola leaves, we have plastered wall, we have inscriptions, posters, and so on. It's just supposed to be, uh-oh. Okay, so we are going to have a few of those images there. Oh, it's the downloading. I think we just transferred the presentation, so we're losing a bit of images here, but I'm...
Shall we close our eyes? You check how much is damaged, and then we decide.
Yeah. Okay, it's okay, it's okay. It's okay. Okay, I'm going to go ahead anyway. It's okay. Don't worry. So this is supposed to be a slide where you have the whole history. So I've actually tried to show where, so our script goes back into the proof of our script goes to 6th century BC. And then we have a vacuum of a time period, and then we have the written proof coming in from the 3rd century, and so on. So that diagram was supposed to be nice. It talks about where it was, this plaster wall, and so on, but it's okay. So it has, so ideally what I wanted to say is the script has evolved and it has its own history. Then the other one that you cannot see was supposed to be the letter K. That also would have, so of course, it was going to be, or it was supposed to be, from this side to the other side was the Brahmi script, because we are deriving from there. So I'll go into a better visual. So if you look at similar scripts, the index scripts, we all look quite similar. They're very rounded. Our thinking is rounded. I don't know about the other Indian scripts, but definitely we Sri Lankans are rounded, and we think in circles as well. So coming back, so Brahmi script. Now, if you look, we are in the right corner or left corner from where you're looking at. So we are in the index script family, but we have branched out a little bit. So this is also could be the fact that we are from an island. And of course, now you know the island thinking, right? So let's not go there. But so the other most important thing about the index scripts or the Sinhala script at this point is the vowel signs. So we have 18 vowels, like most. But what is so unique about Sinhala is we have two vowels that is not there in other index scripts, which is the a and the air sound. Okay, so we use our jaws quite well. So of course, I'm sure you would have seen a lot of diagrams like this throughout the last 2 days. So I will not talk too much, but I boast about this air and the air. And then of course, within this slide deck, within this presentation itself, the previous one spoke about where the medial vowel signs were placed. So of course, with the language comes in. So we have the gutturals, the palatals, the syllables, and so on. And then we have nasals as well. So it's as from a small country, we have a language is quite widely used, I would say. Why is because Sri Lanka is a Buddhist country, and we hold the Buddhist doctrine in written form. So that was in the first century. How that actually started off is when the oral tradition was transformed into, it was converted into books. And that time, from there on, Sanskrit and Pali was used. So Sinhala was used, Sinhala script was used to write these two languages. So so these were also things that you all heard throughout. So it is an abugada. So there's an inherent a in it. So what actually happens is you have a consonant k, and the k already has a sound in it. So if you want to kill the sound, you bring in a hull sound, a vowel sign, and then so you have k and so on. So what I want to show here is the consonant stays in one place and the vowels take a different shape, and then it goes around the letter to say ki, ku, ku, ke, ki, ke, long sound, kai, ko, ko, and cow, and so on. So again, we have lost an image. Don't worry. Basically, I wanted to tell that, even though now I just only showed you the consonant k, but when it comes to certain consonants, we have elements that are brought into the letter in a different form. So that's also there. Another unique thing about the Sinhala script is these three non-alphabetical sounds, which is called the Yansaya, Rakaranshaya, and the Repaya. Now, this is actually the year sound, which is a consonant sound, is being replaced with another sign language. So, script. Sorry, it's called a non-alphabet sign. And so, how this actually most probably this has come in is when we were writing in Ola leaves to cut down time and to write. So we made sure that the parts of the letters and for the speed of writing, certain parts were, we had taken shortcuts, which has been efficient. And then, of course, there are also this particular consonant looking non-alphabetical consonant, which is lu. It looks like a consonant, but it is actually coming in. So what I'm trying to tell here is with the evolution of the script, certain parts or certain elements within the has come in and contributed to this particular script. So writing systems are visual structures to represent a language, and it's organized according to its own principal logics. So now this has happened. So I've told what I needed to tell about Sinhala. It has a long history. Yes, but then we are index scripts. Again, within the index scripts, each of these scripts have its own. Now, even though we are Sri Lanka and just under India, just under geographically under India, we we love India. I know Suman is on the other side as well. So anyway, so cool. But we all have our own, the whole uh, evolution. And then so coming back into these visual symbols, so now they have a sound. And they are visually very clearly, you have to understand these are not just arbitrary sounds, and they are visually structured. Now, why am I telling this? Because technology has come in and people think they can do things to scripts. So I'm standing here and saying, no, please, we have a story, we have our own identity, even though we are just geographically below. I'm not talking about India. I'm talking about the whole of the globe now. Okay, coming back, now, as I said, now we as humans, let's forget about India, Sri Lanka, or whatever. We as humans, we perceive letters as shapes. As I told you, we are very rounded, thinking rounded. So this is this is a visual. So of course, now you all know how your thinking is in case, right? So, so we see letters as shapes. Then of course, you have now these visual shapes have its own visual structures. So you have definitely proportions which has to be in certain places. And if you move these, sometimes you may not understand where the letters are. Now this, so my PhD was actually on the fundamentals of Sinhala typography. So until, well, that was in 2016, we had not defined the Sinhala typography. So if I was to teach typography in Sri Lanka, I would be teaching Latin. And then that was the place where I questioned and thought, okay, if I'm to teach typography, let me just bring in. And of course, before I was interested in typography, and I thought, okay, let's go in for doing some, fancy stuff. And I thought, let's do on legibility, right? And then when I started working on legibility, and I realized there were a lot of big issues that we had that we needed to actually go and solve. Like for example, we don't have type specimens. We don't even know what part of the letter is. Right now, after the PhD, I have defined five lines to define, and we have identified what are the key places and significantly what are the significant features of Sinhala is what came out from the PhD. And so now, because we know this, as a result, we are able to now at least talk about the proportions of the letter. Now, because you know the proportions, you can play around with the letters. And then you can play around with shapes. And then another factor was the typography, or I have now found the lines, but nobody knew what you call it. So there were pieces, and now we have been writing Sinhala for the longest time, but we wouldn't know which part is what. So part of that, the PhD comes in the whole introduction of the nomenclature for Sinhala typography. So of course, it took a while to visually analyze the letter from top to bottom, and it's very theoretical. I basically wish it was a nice method that I brought in to visually analyze, because this is not only for Sinhala. This type of a fate is along in most of the index scripts. So if we can figure out how to observe the letter and maybe break it, we were able to do that. So now why am I doing this? It's because of typography, right? So letters, if it wasn't for the subject, I wouldn't know, we wouldn't be able to know we wouldn't be able to identify features. We would not know the nomenclature. We would not even understand what proportions are. And then, so now I have done something and I'm coming here. I'm trying to understand where do I fit in, right? Whereas I'm looking at Latin, and then they're talking about this huge history. First day workshop, Jerry made us go mad. He was telling about a whole history, and we're like, okay. I felt so useless, actually. Not in a bad way. Yeah, because no, one is I guess why I'm telling this is now we are all coming, I know we are all not talking about typography, but majority of the people are focused on typography. But, there is another side to the story of typography. So that is where I am coming from, and that is what I'm highlighting. So when I want to do something, and I know that how do we do it, or even for me to relate to most of the talks that was happening in the last 2 days, I was thinking, okay, that's a long way to go, or maybe possible. Doesn't matter, love challenges. So now this also doesn't mean that we didn't write. We didn't have printing presses. Nobody cared about it. That was the difference. It was just there because we had bigger problems, right? Come on. How many people entered our course? I told you, we are an island. A lot of people love beaches, right? So the course is taken in for a long time and then comes in. And then, yeah. So as a result of them coming in, we were introduced to the printing press and so on. And so what we have is most of the content that we have about typography is, of course, in archives. So again, now I thought defining the single anatomy was a big deal for my PhD, but then I realized after you define it, how do you tell it? Then I realized we didn't have type specimens. So the PhD actually helped me to basically live in the archives and managed to track down nearly 2 centuries of singular type specimens. So as a result, now there were three categories that I broke it into. So pre-newspaper era, the newspaper era, and the digital era. So as a result, we can see the growth of the visual development of the singular script. And then, of course, you have the script. Now you have a form, but what do you call it, right? So there would have been foundries, there would have been a designer. So that was also quite interesting, quite tedious as well, because this content is not in the archives, it's in other documents. So as a result, I was able to track down 36 typefaces in the last 2 decades. Of course, the latest versions were copies of the same. So this is how it looked. This was an example of the typefaces, the scale of it, and so on. And it was quite interesting to know the variety we've had. But whereas when we look at type, even today in typography, or we only have a very limited amount of typefaces. Now that's the place where I thought this subject comes into play, and it's going to expand further. So I'm just going to run through these. So how this is basically to quickly tell you, I just didn't come up with the sizes and the shapes. I did a thorough study and all that, because she just showed me 5 minutes. Okay. And then so of course, after we figured out the whole, the anatomy, I had to name the pieces of the script. And then, so it was quite interesting because I had to work with language experts, and then they told me not to use anything that I liked. So it was not, these are also not random words that I put in. So they said, okay, so Sinhala is deriving from Sanskrit. So whatever the terms that you're using in Sinhala should be derived. I respect that. I really respected that. And then with that, but the good news is when I translated it into English, it sounded the same terminology that we use in type terminology or type anatomy. So these are examples. So we have the hooks and the lumps, humps, and so on. Of course, there are some unique features for Sinhala as well. Now, what was so because now the reason why I wanted to bring this in is simply because we know the nomenclature and we know exactly the shapes and the sizes of it. Now we can do a lot. So of course, there are places where we join and so on. Now I'm going to rush now, okay? So because I'm going to run out of time. So within typography, these visual symbols are actually classified. Now this is coming from Latin itself. So I'm just going to give an example, take an example, right? Tibet O. which is very clearly they talk about the presence, they talk about an absence, and of course they talk about a shape of a serif, and then say, okay, this is how it is. Now, where am I looking at? We're looking at a set of type specimens, but how do we classify them? Because one is, okay, there's another slide just to explain this. So he breaks it into three significant ones. I don't think I'm going to tell you that. But my question is, so what are serifs in Sinhala script, right? So now one is serifs are, you know what those are. And so I would, if I'm to talk about the key features, the terminus, I have to go back and again find out exactly how the Sinhala letter is written. There's a starting point and then there is an end point. So if I know the terminus, most probably I should be able to figure out exactly what the terminus or the serifs would be. But no, it doesn't work because it's different. Okay, so these were basically telling you, the slides that you couldn't see was basically about how those, like for example, the I of the Sinhala letter is one of the key features, and there are several features. There are around 7 categories which I've broken in. So the way it is, you will be able to identify. I'm going to take another example, Vox. Again, they have categorized it. I'm not going to talk about these because these most of you all know. I'll get into the, for example, the humanists. They are one of the key things about classifying. What they did is they were inspired by the 14th century manuscripts and so on. So they have taken these features and told, okay, these are the key elements that are there if you want to define a humanist typeface. But then what is humanist for us, right? So for us, if you want to look at our books, these are our books. So we have been using Olalif manuscripts, and this is how our book looked like. And inside the book, of course, there is no the justification is perfect. The writing is just very simply, it's perfect lining. And mind you, we never used a pen. It was a sharp pointed edge. And then, of course, we drew with it and so on. And then, of course, more images on Olalif. So if we are to define, then where do we bring that inspiration from? Example. Another example, carols. So this is, again, they were looking at punch cutters of the time, key figures. So again, they have defined what they are. And so what is carols for us in Sinhala? So are we going to look at type specimens? So now this type of type specimens, we rarely would find in Sri Lanka, but we've managed to find. And if we look at it, then it's a matter of actually identifying these features. So we have been studying that. So maybe there's one component that we can take forward. Yeah, this is about how the printing press came into play. I'm going to omit those. So now to talk about letters, so of course, to identify who these, we don't have punch cutters, identified punch cutters. We don't know their names, but somebody had been there. So of course, but one of the key important things is we have to know what is so special about each of these typefaces. Then, of course, looking at the catalogs and taking the names and so on. And then, yeah, slab serifs. Same thing. Again, I will now go into the place where the inspiration coming in from the Industrial Revolution. So yeah, we also had something like that. That was, after all, British were there during the time. And so this is how our printing press looked like. A very much ventilated. So you can imagine, okay? So anyway, coming back. So this is how the newspapers look like. And within the newspapers itself, now you can also see the variations of it. Like, for example, you can see wood blocks on top. Then you have wood type, and then you have the metal, and then you have the whole overall composition. So yeah, nobody talk about typography, but we did have something going on there. And then, so my PhD was mainly focused on text-based letters. So now I'm currently focused on display typefaces because this is the place I thought was very interesting. So I'm working on a data set of nearly 116, again 2 centuries of newspaper, from the first newspaper from 1860 up until 1989, right? And this is my sample set. And I'm going to take you one by one because we don't have time as well. Very clearly, now this is 1860. This left-hand corner is the first printed paper, followed by, while you're looking at these, you will also see the variations that has come in with time. So if you look at it, you can see wood carving coming into play. This is a craft that has come in. And then from 1900 to 30, I'm just jumping 40 years because the number of papers were not that many. So as a result, my first 2 sets of data are between 40 years. And then if you look at it, you can see we're trying. There is a lot of visual form. And mind you, this is also one of the key communication media of the time where newspapers were publicly available. I also have to tell, now Sri Lankans, our literacy level is very high, even during that time. So, so we can, even right now, we are at 97%. So if you meet anybody in Sri Lanka, they will definitely talk to you. They can read and write. Okay. And then we have 9. Now I'm jumping from 10 years on. So now you can see how the variations are dropping slowly. One is because, of course, commercialization coming in. We have bigger issues. Now, this is also the peak. This is the time where we are about to get independence, or this is the time. So there is the variety or what we need to play within the newspapers have dropped. Then comes in the whole national movement coming into Sri Lanka, like Sri Lanka now, this is us, this is who we are. And then comes in, if you know the titles, they're all talking about Sinhala Jatiya, Sinhala as a nation, Sinhala this, Sinhala or king, or they will talk everything to do with bringing in nationalism in the titles itself. There's something quite interesting about this time period is, if you look, it's most probably it's a trend that you have a black background, or the letters have always come in from a background compared to the previous one. And then you go into the 60s. Now you can see color coming into play. And then you have actual playing around and experimenting with different variations. And then we are going into the 70s. It became very colorful. Of course, we had access to a lot of prints, paint or ink, I mean. And clearly, I hope you understand why it's red. Okay, so weirdly, we have so much of red newspapers during that time. This is not colored, right? So there was a huge movement. Now, this is just, this is after independence, but we do not have, we are not as independent as a nation by now, but this is the turning point. So the newspapers are telling this story. Then we are going into the 1980s. So colors have gone in, we have started playing around and so on. So I am going to nearly, I'm wrapping up. But just for you to understand, there's a lot. We wouldn't know what to do. So, but the analysis actually started off very clearly from, extracting the titles. Okay. And then digitizing the titles. And then wherever it was curved, we brought it back into the lines, reference lines, and to understand how the proportions worked. Then we started identifying the skeleton of the letters. So because we identified the skeletons, we would know the variation of the play of the letters. And this is number 1 is the original, 2 is the drawing, and skeleton outlined. So as a result, when you have these skeletons out, you're able to identify what has happened, how the tool or the variation of the flesh of the letter is. And then after this was a side gig where now that you know the proportions and the sizes, you also understand that they have been playing with shape of the letter. So it's not only rounded. Now we also can think in squares and diamonds and so on, and stars, right? And meanwhile, so that has played very significantly. And then after you have categorized all that, we started observing the terminus, and the terminus had its own story. And now when you start observing the terminus, we were able to break it into florals, decorative, and theme-based. We had textures, we had illustrations on it, we had illustrations in it, we had illustrations through it, and so on. And then drop shadows, the bevel edges, the outlines, and so many. Now, right now, if you ask me, if anybody knows what to do with a single letter, or create a nice display font, there is no data. So this is where this whole research is coming in. So this is more like a corpus as well, to tell exactly the variation and the variety that can come in simply by observing a letter. And then, of course, this is contributing to typography, and typography as an academic field. So that's where we are. Of course, I had to throw a few, just 2 slides only. One is on the one category that I brought in. So if you look at it, the figures, so these were the very early ones. You could actually see wood blocks as the titles coming in as wood blocks. And then if I am to categorize monolinear way of the letter, there is quite a variety as well. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. Thank you. Yes, Lawrence.
Thank you. One thing I didn't get quite clear from your talk was whether, in your decision to create your own terminology for zones and parts, did you find nothing that existed before, or was it inconsistent and incomplete from the calligraphers and the printers and so on?
So it was nothing. It was nothing. Only lines that we had was for handwriting for the primers. So there was only 4 lines even for them. So it was like they were taught how to write a letter within within the 4 lines. And yeah, it was at 0. So that's why there is a very alien type of a side to typography.
Yeah, that was amazing. I have actually taught myself to write English with 2 other scripts coming from the Brahmi script, Devanagari in Canada. And so would it be easy, you think, to write English with Sinhalese? Does it have most of our sounds? Would I have to modify it a bit?
No, you can write it because it's a very flexible, very flexible language as well as a script. Yeah,
Good.
yeah. I told you we think in rounds.
Yeah,
We go round and round,
I like that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
but we move forward. Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much. This concludes the second day